In the meantime, we want to get to that stunning presidential interview that might be construed as Donald Trump just letting off steam, but instead, with stunning swiftness, it's having a very real-world impact. So the president's admission today immediately prompted a response from Stormy Daniels' lawyer.
It's a hugely damaging admission by the president because, according to what he said on Air Force One a few weeks ago, he didn't know anything about the agreement. He didn't know anything about the payment. Michael Cohen went off and did this on a lark, and Mr. Trump knew nothing about it.
Danny Savalos, criminal defense attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, joins me now along with Seth Waxman, a former federal prosecutor. So much to get to, but Danny, we want to start with you at the federal courthouse with news from the judge overseeing Michael Cohen's hearing there. What can you tell us?
The judge, Kimball Wood, has decided that the massive amount of documents that Cohen and Trump say were seized by the federal government in the Southern District of New York here will be reviewed by a special master, a former federal judge herself, to determine what documents are attorney-client privileged and what documents are not. This, by any accounts, is a victory for the Cohen and Trump team because the default position is for the government to allow a filter team of prosecutors to review the documents for privilege. Cohen and Trump had asked for themselves to review the documents, which was always a long shot. Judge Kimball Wood has essentially split the difference and landed in the middle, appointing a special independent master to review these privileged documents. The downside is that this may take significantly longer than if the government had been permitted to use their own filter team.
So are we talking weeks, months potentially here?
It's hard to say. That depends entirely on the number of documents seized and the number of documents that Cohen and Trump will argue that are privileged and should remain privileged.
All right, let me go to now what we just heard from Michael Avenatti. He said that the president's admission is hugely damaging. Seth, do you see it that way, or is this just the president again letting off steam? He's somebody known for inconsistencies anyway.
No, I think it's a big problem for the president. He has stepped on another landmine right in the context of ongoing litigation. I mean, his lawyers and he have taken the position in the last week or two that these documents that were seized were subject to the attorney-client privilege and should not be viewed by the government. And now he's gone on record this afternoon by saying that Michael Cohen only did very little work for him in the legal context. You know, the federal prosecutors are now putting that in front of the judge, and they will be hammering that point at every turn with the special master and ultimately with Judge Wood to say, look, he's not even acting as an attorney. So whether it's 20 documents or 10,000 documents, this is a pretty simple process because the president himself, who is the client and who controls the attorney-client privilege, is telling us all that he really didn't use Michael Cohen very much as his lawyer.
So I guess there's different ways that you can interpret this, Danny, and that's what lawyers often are paid to do. When the president said he does a tiny, tiny little fraction of, you know, my legal business, does that necessarily mean it's a tiny fraction of Michael Avenatti's, I'm sorry, of Cohen's legal business? It could be, in fact, couldn't it, that takes up a lot of his time. Where's the line here?
Right. There are two major points to be taken from the president's comments. One is that he says a tiny, tiny amount of legal work was done, of his legal work was done by Michael Cohen. But the other thing that is significant is that he says Michael Cohen is, and I'm paraphrasing, primarily a businessman. The attorney-client privilege only attaches to legal advice. Business advice, just general chit-chat between an attorney and a civilian just does not create an attorney-client privilege. So those two components are very significant. And with those two statements, you can see the circle, the universe of documents claimed by Cohen and Trump to be privileged, to get smaller when it relates to business advice, and then smaller again as Trump says only a tiny, tiny amount of his legal business was done by Cohen.
And Seth, you also heard the president there justifying Michael Cohen's use of the Fifth Amendment. That doesn't jive with what we've heard from him in the past. I just want to remind folks.
He pleaded the Fifth Amendment. Wait, what are we going to do with this guy? What happened? He pleaded the Fifth, right? He pleaded the Fifth. Where is he? Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. Horrible. Horrible. Pleading the Fifth Amendment in front of Congress. You saw that today, yesterday. Fifth Amendment. When you have your staff taking the Fifth Amendment, taking the Fifth, so they're not prosecuted. Taking the Fifth Amendment, how about that? You see, the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
Well, Seth, you can legitimately ask that question. On the other hand, it is his right to do that. What's the impact of this?
Well, I think there's a huge impact, but not for traditional reasons. Look, in a normal criminal case, a jury would never hear that a criminal defendant pled the Fifth. But of course, this is not a normal criminal case, and a jury that would be sitting in Manhattan hearing this criminal case against Mr. Cohen, if he's ever indicted, is going to know that he pled the Fifth, making it that much more likely that they would find him guilty. So right now, Mr. Cohen and his lawyers are trying to decide what to do. Do they go through the litigation against the Southern District of New York if there's an indictment, or do they cooperate with the government? And if it makes it more likely that a jury is going to convict, it pushes him further away from Mr. Trump and closer to the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, which of course can share information with Bob Mueller if Mr. Cohen knows stuff relating to the Russia investigation. And maybe that's why we're starting to see Mr. Trump, the president, distancing himself a bit from Mr. Cohen.
So let me ask you both this very quickly in the few seconds that we have left. And Seth, I'll start with you. Just based on what we've seen over the last less than 24 hours, is the president's jeopardy higher or about the same?
Well, I think it's getting higher for the reasons I just stated. I mean, anything that drives Mr. Cohen closer to cooperation could be devastating for the president. As we all have been hearing, he worked as Mr. Trump's fixer. They've had a close relationship for 10 years. We can only guess to what Mr. Cohen knows, whether it's obviously related to the Stormy Daniels matter or even more importantly, to the Russia investigation. If these events cause Mr. Cohen to get closer to cooperating, that is something that will be very troubling to Mr. Trump.
Danny, you agree?
I do. I mean, the factor here is who's going to offer Michael Cohen the best deal if a deal is ever offered. On the one hand, Donald Trump could arguably pardon him, but on the other hand, the government, in theory, could offer a non-prosecution agreement, which is not preferred by the U.S. Attorney's Manual and U.S. Attorney's policy, but it's something that would be even better than a pardon. So Michael Cohen is really feeling the pressure, irrespective of the fact that they definitely could be considered to have won today in court.
Danny Savallo, Seth Waxman, thanks to both of you. A lot of breaking news on the legal front, so we appreciate their expertise.